Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call this informational meeting of Tuesday, May 24th, 2022 to order. At this time, as we always do, we'll go to council remarks. Councilor Karras.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, fellow councilors. Just wanted to give everybody a heads up that over the next couple of weeks, I hope to take some time and meet with each of you. I'm drafting a resolution, hopefully to present on June 7th to establish a task force to present some ideas to the city council to deal with homelessness and safety along East 8th Street. And so hoping to meet with each of you to get some ideas on that resolution and looking for a second councilor that would be willing to sponsor that with me to get that on the agenda. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up that I'll be reaching out to you and meeting over the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other council remarks? Seeing none, we'll jump into our first presentation, Sioux Falls Sports Authority update. Thomas Lee.
Hello, thank you for having me. Thomas Lee, Executive Director of the Sioux Falls Sports Authority. I'll go through some slides here in a minute, but just to give you a little bit of a history about what we are. When I first moved here about 3.5 years ago, we were doing some furniture shopping, and one of the people helping us furniture shop said, "You moved here from Charlotte to work for a shoe store?" It's the Sports Authority, right? And that's not what we are. I think they're now bankrupt. They're not in the malls anymore, but and that would be fine if I did. But we're the Sioux Falls Sports Authority. We are the local sports commission that in 2006 was founded as a nonprofit 501c3 organization to bring marquee major collegiate events to the area. That was something we weren't bringing to the area, and our neighboring cities around the Midwest were with their sports commissions, and quite frankly, all around the country. And a few leaders here, Sanford, First Premier, the Chamber, Forward Sioux Falls, they kind of all got together and said, what are we missing? That's what we're missing. Let's create this nonprofit organization. It's a sports commission. We'll get in the game of sports tourism at that marquee level. And sure enough, in 2006, they did. In 2009, long before I got here, we recruited the first Summit League men's and women's basketball championships to Sioux Falls. And of course, it's been here ever since, originally in the arena, and now since 2016, I believe it has been in the Premier Center. We operate the marathon each year. This year it'll be August 28th. We have operated and hosted nearly a dozen NCAA Division I and Division II championships. Since 2015, we've hosted Ncaa National Championships. So we'll get through some of those here in a little bit. But let's bring you to present day organization structure with our staff of essentially 2 full-time employees, myself and Jerry Paleshi, and then Ann helps us part-time leading up to the marathon. She helps us with some of the logistics of putting that event together. We're made up, including myself, of a 17-person board, and you can see the 16 names other than myself on the right there. And I thank them for their passion and their interest, their involvement in not just the Sioux Falls Sports Authority, but of course just moving the needle forward when it comes to sports in the city in general. So we'll go through a little bit of slides of what the events have or have been coming up. The Sioux Falls Marathon, as I mentioned, takes place August 28th. It consists of a full marathon, half marathon, 10K, and 5K. And the beneficiary of that event is Sanford Children's and Children's Miracle Network. Get a percentage of the net profits that event produces. We run starting essentially at Howard Wood or just near Howard Wood. We finish on the track at Howard Wood Field for each of those distances. And then throughout the routes, we go through the Terrace Park area, Covell Lake, Cathedral District, downtown, Falls Park, and then if you're running the full or the half, you hit a lot of the major parks along the bike trail system. So that'll be August 28th. We've hosted that, or it's been with us, the Sioux Falls Sports Authority, for probably 12 years. I think 2010 was the first year that we operated that. As I mentioned earlier, the Summit League men's and women's basketball championships have been held in Sioux Falls since 2009. In 2022, just this past March, we had nearly 65,000 fans in the venue. That's the second most ever since moving to Sioux Falls. Since 2009, 632,000 fans have entered that building. The most impressive stat on there is that 282,000 of those fans were there for the women's tournaments. It is year in and year out, top couple, and I'm talking Power 5 conferences. As far as women's attendance, it's one of the highest there is. The men's are very high up there when it comes to the mid-majors and the attendance for the men's tournament, but the women's is consistently up there with conferences all throughout the country. So that is an impressive stat, and 64,000 fans just for 1 year, just this past March, is a lot of fans. Over 4 days. Next year, the tournament will move to 5 days. They'll have 10 teams for each of the men and the women's tournaments. So that tournament next year will start on Fridays. Here are the NCAA championships we've either hosted or are hosting in the future. The left column, 2015, 16, 17, 18, all went off very successfully. 2020, you'll see the asterisks by those. Those were COVID cancellations. Unfortunately, D2 Wrestling was actually here in-house in Sioux Falls at the Premier Center setting up. The wrestlers were here, the NCAA staff were here, and the next day, the day before the tournament was to happen, our worlds kind of got flipped upside down, so we kind of got to live through that a little bit with the NCAA here in Sioux Falls while that was happening, and the women's tournament that year would have been in December, or the volleyball tournament would have been in December. Coming up in 24 and 26, we have the men's ice hockey D1 regional and D2 women's volleyball championship, as well as D2 wrestling and the ice hockey championship again in 26. And then, so just kind of behind the scenes, that bid cycle will start again with the NCAA next summer. So in the summer of 2023, we will be putting bids together for years 27 through 31. It's about an 8-month process for cities all across the country to put those bids together, and when we finally submit those, you'll hear a big sigh of relief from my office. That'll be nice to have that finished, but then the NCAA then reviews for 6 or 7 months, and then finally lets all the cities know at once what D1, D2, and D3 championship sites have been awarded. In 2018, 19, and 20, we hosted the Ncaa D2 Men's Basketball National Championship. This was at the Pentagon. This is a unique event because all 32 teams come to the Pentagon, come to the site to play. So it's a week-long tournament as opposed to just a weekend-long tournament. And, so the logistics behind this are massive. You got to find 32 team hotel room or 32. You got to find hotels for 32 teams. You got to find, you actually have to sponsor their food, a couple meals per day for them. And so there's a lot of logistics behind just what you see at the venue for those things, busing and transportation and all those sorts of things. So fun tournament. That one also in 2020 got canceled halfway through. We got 2 or 3 days of play-in, and then COVID hit, and we had to abandon that tournament. And here are some slides just from what we've hosted previously. Sorry, for some reason it didn't format very well at the bottom. I see the word fans got cut off. But this was a picture from the 2016 D2 Wrestling Championships. This was a finals record attendance of nearly 10,000 fans, or just over 9,000. Here's what ice hockey looked like in March of 2018. This is, again, this was a D1 regional, and we'll host this event again in 24 and 26. Not all regionals look like this when it comes to ice hockey, so we put on a really good showing. Here's volleyball at the Pentagon in 2016. And I added this picture because, it's beyond just what happens inside the venue that is memorable and important to the NCAA or the Ncaa or whatever the organization it is. It's how do the players feel? Do they feel welcome? Do they remember the hospitality that X city gave them? And we always want them leaving Sioux Falls, remembering Sioux Falls as the city, not just a city, but the city. So we make a 20-foot banner and says, make it yours, welcome Division II players. We put signage up at the airports. We do some signage downtown if it's appropriate. certainly signage in each of their team hotels just to make them, not every city does that. Some do, most do, but not every city does. And we just want to go as above and beyond as we can to make sure when they leave here, they remember us. It's essentially our audition to host future championships. That's all I've got for slides. I told Kurt before this, I don't have 15 minutes prepared, but I'm happy, very happy to answer any questions you all have.
Thank you, Thomas. Councilors, questions? Councilor Neitzer?
I know one of the challenges with sometimes landing the NCAA tournaments and things is I think they have a certain number of, I think they call it full-service hotels that they want. How do we stand in the city as it relates to that?
So really the only restriction we would have in hosting an NCAA event right now is if it were to be a D1 men's March Madness event. That's 8 teams. They each need their own separate hotel, and each of those need to be full service. So when we say full service, we mean restaurant in the venue, as well as the NCAA needs approximately 4,000 square feet of meeting space. That's where we come short. I always say it's not the hotels we have. The hotels we have are great. It's the hotels we don't have that are probably the reason we haven't hosted that event yet.
Do they have any sort of rule as to proximity? I mean, if one was built at, let's say, 69th and Louise, is that acceptable?
Sorry, you were going to say Brookings. Yes, 69th.
Yeah.
That would work. 69th and Louise would work. Absolutely.
Just somewhere in the city?
Absolutely. When I was in Charlotte, we hosted I guess it was 18, that a team stayed about 15 miles away. So they would probably stay further than that if the property worked, and that's not a problem. And 69th and Louise is a quick jot up the interstate, so no problem there.
And you noted that you're a nonprofit, but where do you get most of your funding? Of course, you have, like I'm registered and I've done 3 times before, like the Sanford, I want to call it Sanford, but the Sioux Falls Marathon, and that's, there's registration fees for some of these things. I mean, where does most of your funding come from?
Sure, so we're privately funded. Those first few years of operations, Sanford and First Premier really kicked in the ground roots funding for those years. Once we became a little more profitable, it's really event funded. The marathon makes money. We had financial revenue share with the Summit League, the NAIA. Any event we bring here, we want there to be a financial aspect to it that goes back to the Sioux Falls Sports Authority. And that's usually sold with sponsorships. If it comes to events with the marathon, of course, there's registrations as well. But we are privately funded.
Okay.
Or event funded, yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and you bring a lot of great events and quality of life, and I can only imagine the amount of economic impact that you drive for us by doing that. So, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Councilor Starr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lee, talk a little bit, because at one time, I think with the Sports Authority, I remember talking about some youth events and haven't seen that part of it. So is that still a priority for the Sports Authority? I mean, I had heard, Olympic trial type of things and some of those things. Are you dabbling in that area, or are you still?
We certainly could. Olympic trials would be something we would want to at least have a conversation with as our board. Youth, probably not so much. Experience Sioux Falls does a great job bringing in those youth sports. So we typically, it's subjective, but we say the marquee events, whatever that means, but essentially collegiate. But yes, U.S. Olympic trials would certainly fit that, I would think, marquee billing.
What's that take? I mean, to do that kind of, and you've gotten good at working with the NCAA, so
sure.
You would think that part of the U.S. Olympic Committee would be a little more challenging.
So in Charlotte, my previous job, we hosted the U.S. Olympic para trials for track and field, cycling, and swimming. And it was a great event, one of my favorite events that I've ever been a part of. So you've got to have the venues. We have that for the most part. It depends on what we're going for. But we've got the Premier Center, which is ideal for ice or not ice, right? If we want to do a curling trials, we have the Premier Center. We wouldn't. I know. Kurt's happy. But even with Augustana's new sheets that they're putting in, that gives kind of more ammo to us to go out to these NCAAs or USOCs and say, here's what we have to offer, right? It's a funny story. My parents, old school, they never know it. My dad was a coal miner. Like, what do you do for a living again? I kind of had to explain it. I work in sports. And so the easiest way to say, like, what my job is pretend I'm a head coach of a football team is I'm going into these living rooms, Indianapolis, NCAA, Colorado Springs, USOC, and I'm trying to recruit them to my campus. I'm trying to recruit these events to my campus. And that's the only, I'm sorry for the bad analogy, but that's the only way I can get through to my parents what I do for a living. But the point is that is what we're trying to do is when I go meet with them or if we ever have them come here on a site visit, it's simply to show off all of our assets and honestly, when it comes to our lack of full service hotels, we'll talk about that too. We don't want there to be an elephant in the room. We want to address it, but there's 200 cities across the country doing the same thing. So we just have to keep building, not building, but necessarily keep our facilities great and keep building the hotels. That's the biggest piece.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Other councilors? Councilor Selberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. I certainly appreciate all you guys do. When you talk about the revenue share from the Summit League tournament, what kind of split is that, and what is the average income of that for the Sports Authority?
It varies. The very first year, so when they recruited this event from Tulsa, it was in a gym that was nowhere near as nice as even the old arena here in Sioux Falls. So they recruited that event, and they just gave a guarantee. If you come to Sioux Falls, I forget what it was, $100,000. We guarantee this event will make $100,000, and that wasn't the case in Tulsa. They weren't making $100,000, and luckily they did. And I think the split in the very beginning was anything over $100,000 will split. And so there's been variations of that to the point where it's grown probably to a couple $100,000 as far as Sioux Falls Sports Authority revenue, and then even larger than for the Summit League, of course, because it's their event. They're the organizers. And when they moved their offices here to Sioux Falls from the Chicago area, they had a lot more staff. So our relationship has changed over the past, I'd say, 2 years, understandably, and we're working through that with the new commissioner on what our potential relationship would be going forward.
And that's the biggest revenue maker, I'm assuming, for the Sports Authority by a long ways. What's next? Like, what other events have you had that have?
The marathon's probably next. Ballpark, anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 each year.
Okay.
That'd probably be before our split with the Children's Miracle Network. But that would be the next event. And then we've got a few events in mind that we're going to hopefully create that will be ours, right? The problem with events that you recruit is they're probably going to go somewhere the next year. And we know the marathon's not going anywhere. And if we can create a couple other events that are staples to Sioux Falls that are ours, we own and operate, not only do we know they won't go anywhere in future years, but we can actually increase those revenue opportunities for those events to maybe not in year 1, but year 3 and 5 actually really be financial drivers for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. How long do board members serve?
3-year terms.
3-year terms.
Yep.
Okay.
You have 3-year terms, and some are renewed on a 2-term limit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Karras?
What's the relationship between the Sports Authority and like the Sanford International? And if something was to ever change there with the Sanford International, has the Sports Authority ever had interest in helping make sure we have a golf tournament opportunity here in Sioux Falls?
We'll do whatever it takes to keep that tournament here. ProLinks operates that, and they're truly the golf experts, right? Like, there's not a sports commission in the country that would just, we'll host a golf tournament this year. You bring in the experts, and Josh Brewster and Davis Trouson and ProLinks staff, they're the experts. So yes, we have helped them in the past. We've helped find volunteers. I volunteered for them last year, little things like that. But when it comes to that, we will do what we can, absolutely. And but you're not going to run that tournament on a 2-person staff. Yeah.
Other questions? Well, I just have a few, give you the opportunity to give us a little insight on what you are working on besides what you've listed with the NCAA. Give us an idea of what else could come to Sioux Falls.
So part of creating events that we know aren't going to go anywhere is this December. I've wanted to do it for a couple years. COVID's kind of canceled that thinking, is create a boxing event. I kind of jokingly say, think chamber dinner, but boxing. So instead of a stage and a speaker, you get a boxing ring, but it's a somewhat formal affair, and you dress up and you sell it to the business community. You have a fancy dinner, bar, fancy lit room, and then a blood sport. So that's one thing that we did in Charlotte, and other communities have done it, and it has gone incredibly well those first few years. You know, by year 10, maybe there's a little bit of fatigue, but we're not even at year 1 yet, so I'm not too worried about year 10. So that's an event I think that can create a lot of steam, and we hope to do that year 1 this December. Yeah. Other things, what do you want me to say? Curling? Kurt wants me to say curling. We're going to create a curling World's Championship. Small things, right? None of these are huge in year 1. I reached out to the city. It's not going to happen this year. Maybe it happens next year. Is to do like an 8 p.m. 5K on a first Friday. So we don't have to just make money, right? I know everybody, the board wants us to make money, but they also understand the value of what are we doing for the community? What are we doing for sport? And so for the runners, of course, we do the marathon in August. But if we can do a first Friday, so downtown's already rocking. We got Levitt Shell rocking. Let's add 500 runners to do a 5K. South on Phillips, U-turn, come back on Phillips. You've got people cheering them on. Essentially, your spectators are built in with what's already happening at the Levitt in downtown. Some construction reasons and other reasons are why it can't happen this year. But I'm gonna revisit that next year and just see if we can't get that off the ground, right? Part of it, of creating events, is just making it happen in year 1. And then we find out what we did right, what we did bad, and how we can actually create that to be a better atmosphere in year 2, 3, and 4.
All right. I will just say, as being a member, I'm on the board and have been for several years, it's very exciting to see an organization that's not a governmental organization bring the partnerships that are needed to come to bring Sioux Falls a national exposure. And that's what this has done. And I have been to so many events, baseball, wrestling, hockey, and to see people come from all over the United States to come to these things, it's really good. So, and you've done a great job, Thomas, and I appreciate all you've done.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you all very much.
Next, I don't know how you could be more exciting than that, but let's get into the growth management tier map updates, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sam Trebelcock, City of Sioux Falls Planning Office. With me today too is Jeff Schmidt with the Sioux Falls Planning Office. So what we're going to do today is give you a little update on your June 7th agenda. Is an agenda item for tier map updates. And I want to make sure before we have that agenda item that you guys understand what exactly we're trying to do and a little background behind that, because the tier maps come as a part of our comprehensive plan. And so we're going to do a little bit of a primer on that so that everybody understands, you know, what that is, and then also for everybody else a little bit of background and so understanding why it's important. So next slide here, first of all, the comprehensive plan is a legal document. And that's important because there's a lot of times you're going to hear about the comprehensive plan. Whether it's for these tier maps that we're talking about today, or if it's a zoning item or a subdivision item, the comprehensive plan is something that is required by state law. So it's a public document adopted by the government to address the planning requirements of state law. There's been Supreme Court cases to say if you don't have it, your zoning ordinances are invalid. So it is a very important document to make sure you do appropriately, and we update to make sure it reflects what's going on. Next, also, there's a very specific process to adopt it. So Planning Commission must hear it first. It recommends, it's required. So for instance, on the tier maps, that's already taken place. We've gone to Planning Commission. On those tier map updates, they've recommended, and now it'll come in front of you on, as I said, June 7th. And there's a requirement that there's publication ahead of time. All those kind of things are important that we do. It's also the basis of our land use regulations. The plan should include goals and policies to follow when structuring or zoning in your subdivision ordinance. And then, most importantly, the zoning ordinance must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The subdivision ordinance must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And then what Planning Commission does and what you do as City Council, your decisions must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan is also a policy document beyond that. It's not an ordinance, it's actually by resolution, but it is, if you've actually looked at the entire document, it's rather lengthy, and I'll kind of take you through some of those chapters in just a second, what they all are. But it develops policies that help guide future ordinances and master plans and budgets that are, that are required by state law. So again, policies, what are they? They're a definite course of action. These are things that we're saying as a city we're going to move towards. So there's different chapters. I'm going to go through a few of them just to give you kind of the highlights. That first chapter is our goals, our community goals, and it includes effectively managing growth, which we're going to specifically talk about a little bit more here today. Planning neighborhoods and improving sustainability. Chapter 2 is to determine the location of phasing of new development out to the year 2040. That's our growth management chapter. That's the chapter which the tier maps are within. So maintaining adequate supply, development of land all times, preventing unlimited outward expansion, and those kind of policies are included within that chapter. Chapter 3 is kind of our future land use chapter. So our future land use map is within that chapter. So it's to guide the arrangement of future neighborhoods and employment centers. So there's policies within there dictating or describing how those future growth areas will be developed and where they will be. Chapter 4 is really talking about the future zoning districts that we have and also how we will transition between those. So it's the policy for those. Chapter 5 is our development standards. So also included within our zoning ordinance and our subdivision ordinance, it's telling you in that chapter what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be moving forward with those. Chapter 6 is our corridor section. I bring this section up because you're going to see some land use corridor studies brought forward to you over the next few months that really kind of help further define that corridor section. And a lot of the corridors, as you'll know, like Minnesota Avenue, how are we going to work through future zoning decisions along that corridor? And so that corridor study will discuss that. Chapter 6 discusses that in kind of broad, big picture sections and policies. Chapter 10 is also how you implement your comprehensive plan. How do we do that? Annexation, zoning, subdivision, or capital improvements plan. And then there's other plans that we can do. Like I talked about, our corridor plans, sub-plans. Sometimes we can be doing our bicycle plan, pedestrian plans. All those kind of things are to help effectuate your comprehensive plan. So going back to chapter 2, and now that we've kind of taken a broad brush of the comprehensive plan, chapter 2 is a really important chapter of our plan. The last time we did a major amendment was in 2016. We amended the tier maps last in 2019. Our goal is really to update those every year. That's where we're headed. So the map should be updated each year to keep the citizens and development community updated as the areas of the city are available for urban services and development of growth management policy framework. You'll see those maps in a second. Essentially the maps, what they do is to tell the citizens, the development community, where we're going to grow and when we're going to grow there into new areas, into new development areas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to take you specifically through those tier maps.
Thank you. Jeff Schmidt with the Planning Department. And I'm just going to go over the 4 maps that we kind of get down into the fine details. These are the maps that we're going to be updating. You hear about this the most when you're going to be hearing rezoning or subdivision issues. And the main reason why we're bringing this forward right now at this time period is because we wanted to get these maps updated in front of you before you do the capital improvement program and those public hearings. Because if you have any discussions about, is this infrastructure the necessary because it's in the comprehensive plan and within this growth limit. So our tier 1, these are tiers, not tiers, are things that are within the 5-year CIP. This is the most critical. If you don't take anything else away from this, when you see a blue on the map, it's in the 5-year CIP. So this is currently showing the 2022 to 2026, and then when you adopt the new one in September, we'll update it again, and it will be the next one. Then after that, it's not in the CIP, but it's supposed to be in the following 6 to 15 years because we need additional budget to take care of that. And then the third tier is 16 to 25 years, and this will all come together when I show you the maps. We have 4 maps. We have a sanitary sewer map, a water and roads map, and a drainage and public facilities. And those all go hand in hand. And then when we sit down as staff, Public Works and all the other departments along with planning, we coordinate them all into an overall compatibility map that shows you one map that you have as a static map. Okay, so for example, with sanitary sewer, this map is the new updated map, and you can see the tiers, the blue, the green, the orange, and if this works for me like it did earlier. So down in the south part of town, south of 69th Street, south of 85th Street, previously everything was in tier 3. Back in 2019, everything was orange in tier 3. Now we've broken it into 3 tiers. On the west side, you see blue, in the middle you see green, and in the orange you see green and then orange. So those are the 3 tiers we've broken it into. So that's a new highlight that you'll recognize, and that will go over into the development area aspect. Okay, now water and roads. So this is specific to the capital improvement program, the CIP. The big changes here is because we've brought in the CIP aspects of it. The other thing that you should note here for fine detail is people really want to make sure water gets installed before roads. They really get upset when we put a road in and then you tear it out and you put a water main in top. So that's why we coordinate these at the same time to make sure that when those 2 public entities get together and we go, okay, does this all make sense? You know, when those 2 entities, when we work Public Works and say, you know, when you look down there in the southeast part of town, is this the same time frame for Public Works to do water and roads? And they're like, yes. That works for us, okay? So we're coordinating those, and again, as Sam mentioned, we really want to do that on an annual basis. Then this one gets really busy, but again, it's the same philosophy that with fire stations, with schools, with libraries, with parks, and with drainage projects, these all kind of go hand in hand, and you see this throughout the city of Sioux Falls. If there's going to be a park area, we generally coincide those with schools and generally open space, and there'll be a drainage pond also. So if we're showing one here, we try to coordinate all 4 of those together, and so we look at this map and go, well, does one need to move or another? At the same time, what it really represents is the parks master plan that we'd like to have a park in every quarter mile, every half a mile, so that we can have that service area. And then the schools cover about every 1.5 miles. And then we're in 7 different school districts in the city of Sioux Falls. So you can see where it labels the T, Harrisburg, Brandon Valley, Canton, and all that. So we try to show the school areas, which can change, but in the fine details, if a development comes in and they bring in a subdivision plan, I look at that preliminary subdivision plan and say, hey, by the way, somewhere within here, we really need to see 40 acres of ground for a school, a park, drainage area. Can we work together to try to coordinate some land development? So that's what this one's doing. And then what we get down to, this is the map. This is the development areas map that is so critical. And anytime someone says, is this in tier 1 or 2? You can think about the sanitary sewer, you can think about the drainage one, but it comes to play on this one. This is the one we're referring to. Because again, and Sam will point to it, if you're out in the Brown area, out in the people can buy ground. They can buy ground out by Harrisburg or out by Brandon, but no further out, Sam, rural. Yeah, they can buy ground, but we go, look, that's rural area. We do not plan on bringing infrastructure out there. You can hold it, but there is no expectation for us to develop land outside of our 25 years. So you have to hold on to it, and there's no urban infrastructure. That's where you'll hear a lot. They're like, look, I invested all this money. Why aren't you bringing me water, roads, a fire station, a school? And we're like, look, you knew on an annual basis that that was not developable land. Then they get into Sioux Falls and they can look at a blue area and go, so if I buy property right in here, what's my expectation? It's in the CIP. Within the next 5 years, we're going to have water, roads, sewer, and hopefully a school, park, all that infrastructure. This is the map that we refer to, and it's public, it's transparent. We're standing here in front of you and the TV. We've gone out to IRAB, Planning Commission, and again, we do it on an annual basis to explain to people. Have an expectation of when your land can be developed. The hardest thing is when they buy down in the southeast, in the orange, and they buy land down there, and then they go, okay, I need to have it developed tomorrow. And we go, we can't, you have a budget, you just went through CIP, and you go, we can't bring all of our public infrastructure tomorrow down there just because you bought the land. It's just like talking to your kids and going, I can't get you those new shoes just because you want them. You knew it was going to be 16 to 25 years, so your holding costs are going to be longer because someone else bought in the blue and they're expecting it to be there. Now, the last thing I'll close with in this is that in Tier 1, 0 to 5 years, we currently are showing 5,500 acres within that blue area. In Tier 2, we have 4,007 acres within all of the green area. And in the orange, we have 17,700 acres. So we plat in the city of Sioux Falls 700 acres a year of land. So again, Sam and I and the others, we look at how much land we have available and how much we use so that we consume this, and we look at, okay, just looking at Tier 1, if we have 5,500 acres, 700 acres a year, that has 8 years of growth right there, and we're showing it to be 5 years of development. So we have enough in Tier 1. Tier 2, we don't quite have enough, but we have 25 years of growth in Tier 3. And so we have a little bit too much in Tier 3 that we need to, and that's where we sit down in CIPs and we have those discussions. But right now, we have a good land use of, 25,000 acres to get us through the next 25 years. So all this coming back to, we bring it to City Council. We want it to be effective in July so that you would have it for your capital improvement, for any discussions that come up. And then please understand, we will be back again in the fall. We're starting this review again. We update it because you've just adopted a new capital improvement program. Any changes, we go out to the public, have these conversations, and we want to have the conversation go over again. So, any questions or comments for Sam or I?
Councilors, questions? Councilor Starr.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Where do we stop? Where is the edge of Sioux Falls 50, 75 years? Is there a place that it makes sense to naturally stop? Because you see it in some places. Sioux Falls has grown, but you don't see the, I don't know what I want to call Brandon or T or Harrisburg. I mean, there's going to be some natural boundaries when we have to stop when we go that direction, but it seems a little more open going west. But is there a place that kind of?
And you answered the question.
Suburb.
Excellent question, because you can see on this map, the yellow areas are our surrounding communities. So on this map in the northeast, you can see Brandon. On the south, you can see Harrisburg and T. On the west, you can see Hartford and Crooks. So as you kind of mentioned, you kind of get stuck to the east because that's Iowa, unless we're Sioux Falls, Iowa, which no, and we can't really go to the south. North, it's all floodplain.
Right.
So this gets us out to 2040. So then what do we do next? And there is a sanitary sewer study that some of you council members have seen where they've looked out to the year 2115. So when you're still here in the year 2115,
I'll be chewing
You
gum
know,
in my Jello.
our kids, but they're looking to that northwest, to the west and northwest, and we can go all the way out to Wall Lake, and you go up between Crooks and Hartford. So that gives us our 100-year plan, 700 acres a year, 1,000 acres a year. How much land do you need? How do you consume it? And then you got to look at what are you going to do for water and roads. But it goes west and north.
Potentially is the solution to part of our housing issue to invest more in the capital improvements to bring the land on faster in that tier 2 and into tier 3? Or, I mean, the cost estimates to do that have to be staggering to add more than the 700 acres per year type of thing.
It's a little bit of everything, which is why we do the entire comprehensive plan that Sam put up front. We have to look at all things. You have to look at, we currently have 80 square miles in the city of Sioux Falls right now. And there's a lot of area that currently isn't being used or maybe not using to its best advantage. So we talk a lot. It's not always, you need to use the existing infrastructure, existing density, and so do we need to grow more with what we have, which is what you see in Minneapolis and Omaha, and maybe need to grow up more. How much do you want to continue to grow out? You know, and can the roads handle that? Can the water handle it? So you look at, well, that's not the answer, but can you do a little bit more density and growth with the infrastructure and then bring more into tier 2 and then look at certain areas that you maybe go west and maybe a little bit more to the east and southeast. And it's that whole comprehensive aspect of how do you want to handle the development versus just saying, what we're going to do is continue to do the exact same thing we've always done. That's probably not the best answer. So not giving you the correct, easy solution, but we have to look at everything.
Thank you.
Yep.
Counselor Jensen.
Thank you, Counselor Sale. When you look at this and you put new properties in the tier 3 in the orange area, and even the tier 2 and tier 1, do you alert these landowners in any regard or have any, conversation in those specific areas to get public input and not just, and not trying to be offensive, but just not your, do you guys do that at all to get public input?
Not on this round, not with the tier maps. When we go out, and we'll have another discussion with you later, in the plating jurisdiction. When we do, tonight you'll have that joint jurisdiction discussion with Lincoln County, and when you do Minnehaha County. When we change that jurisdictional boundary, and we bring a property into our jurisdiction, we have those discussions. But when we change the map from tier 1 to tier 2 or tier 2 to tier 3, we don't have those discussions. It's this. We have a public hearing at Planning Commission by resolution. We have a public hearing at City Council by resolution. So, and it's just, how do you do it? When do you do it? I've had it on our website since like April, when Sam and I did it back in, it's like 2019, we had public hearings and public meetings at the library every Thursday night for, I think, a month and a half. I think we got 4 people. People are like, I don't want to talk about what you're doing in 2040. They want to know what city council's acting about when that apartment complex comes in Tuesday night, They're like, 40 years, it's really hard to get their attention.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Counselor Neitzer.
The inside of the city limits, all of the dark brown,
Yes.
is that undeveloped or unplatted property?
Correct. So we're working with Civic Analytics. Sam and I sat down with them and said, we need to do a better job of representing the land that's currently available for development. And Chris Anderson, give him credit for coming back and looking at that. So that's land that's currently not developed, and it takes different connotations every time, but yes.
Yeah, so a lot of this would be like in my Northwest, where it's sewered, it's sewerable, and so there's cost recoveries waiting for it. So we've maybe invested in a sewer basin,
Yeah.
and we recover that on the back end by doing cost recovery. So that's where it's always, as much as we can encourage people, hey, there's all this land, it's ready to go. There's a road there, there's a sewer.
Correct.
But many times you have to have a willing seller. Sometimes people are sitting on the land and they don't want to sell it.
That's where
Yeah.
we get stuck, and they're like, but some of it's probably already in ownership, or there's a development proposals coming through, and we're like, yeah, but could we have that at least discussion? And so that's a good point, Greg, and that's why we're trying to show it better.
Okay, and the yellow, so these are the existing growth boundaries of things like T, Harrisburg, Brandon, Hartford.
Yes.
Do those ever change?
You want to? Yes, they do.
So, yeah, for instance, even on this map, final version, Harrisburg's has changed, where there's more yellow there. Basically, anything south of 106 is the Harrisburg growth area. But yes, they changed, their comprehensive plans changed just like ours do. That Hartford one that you see there, that changed not that long ago. So yes.
Because that more or less represents their expectation of what they can basically service over the years, what they think they will. Is that more or less right?
Yes.
How far they can grow?
That should be the intent, is that, that each community, this is the area that we would serve for future development.
So if they change though and they decide, hey, I think we can go farther east, they're potentially taking some of our growth area. Is there some sort of a joint agreement or?
Yeah, and right now we have agreements, really more related to the plating jurisdiction that Jeff was talking about, a little in the joint jurisdictional area. I mean, we have one with Brandon. It's 6 Mile Road in Madison. With T, it's 85th Street and I-29 for the most part. Harrisburg, we still need to update that one, but essentially the way it's going to work out, it's County 106, or it would be like 101st Street for us eventually. So, but we do work through those agreements, because there is something in state law that says you have to be equidistant for your plating jurisdiction, so you can't go too far. But in some cases, one community, it might make more sense for them to change that, so we have special agreements.
And then maybe my other question is, I have heard discussions more than once that, for example, like out near Cherry Lake, like going north there is a lot of, and I'm assuming it's because of potentially Skunk Creek or something, that there's a lot of floodplain. So would we expect that that there would be is there land, and then there's Ellis, a little town of Ellis and stuff. I don't know if we would ever swallow them up or anything, but are we going to go north and there'll be just a lot of property that would be annexed and just not really developable? I mean, is there opportunities going north, or are we talking a massive area that's really undevelopable?
So certainly there's some area, this map shows where we could service, but it doesn't necessarily show the land uses. That's where you get into the future land use map. Yeah. And this map does show it to a degree. You can see what Jeff just pulled up here, which is the public facilities.
Okay.
And it shows that area there's a lot of floodplain. So you'll see on the future land use map is it shows up as green, which is a conservation area. And a lot of that's just because what you just said, Greg, which is some of that area is undevelopable. Or not undevelopable, but lower density, maybe conservation parks, things like that.
And then my other question is, on the map that shows the nodes, the sub-regional employment nodes, I think there was on here, wasn't it? You had one of those?
Yeah, it was on early on.
Yeah, so it's a little, that's a different component than this, but as you're showing these boundaries changing, when do you potentially add more dots? Like, okay, you say that this area, this thing's over here is going to be a sub-regional and this is going to be a regional.
So
When
the
did the-
overall extent of our growth area did not change. All that changed is within the growth area. We changed
just
the
the tier-
phasing.
Okay, all right.
So we changed, essentially some of tier 3 went to tier 2. You know, as we move forward, you're gonna see that. Some other areas changed from tier 2 to tier 1. But the overall extent of our growth area stayed. So we didn't change anything with this plan. But over time, yes, you will, probably in the next few years, we're gonna do a major update of our comprehensive plan and need to, because it's gonna be time.
So if we added this west side,
Yeah, if we added that, and if we see that there's a need for that as we move forward, we would bring that in, and then, yes, then we would start to show additional employment centers, what the land use should be as a part of that.
So here, your boundaries didn't change, all that changed is really just the timing and the
Yep.
tiering, essentially, the colors
tiering.
of what they are? Okay.
Yep.
So when the boundaries change, you would assign, let's say we've pulled in some new highway, you'll put dots on that, but that's not, but this entire area has already been assigned all of its nodes? Okay, all right.
Counselor Jensen?
And then to follow up on that, so back, well, we can use this map, but all of the west side, outside of the tiers, that will eventually, when you expand out, that's when you have the public input and stuff to your earlier comment? Okay, thank you.
Counselors, other questions? One more, Mr.
Yeah,
Spencer?
so I mean, it does bring up a question. What do you tell people if, okay, they live just outside of city limits and their thing just changed to blue? So then they might start going to, uh-oh, within 0 to 5 years, you're going to annex me? What is your answer?
So really our answer is that it does not necessarily mean that you're gonna be annexed. It means that we have the capability to annex you during that time period. So really, a development will only occur, and there's plenty of examples of that you can see in some of
Yeah.
those brown areas, where they're just not ready, they're not going to, that's up to them. We're not gonna force anything like that.
So, I mean, the answer is that we expect in the next 5 years that we would be able to provide you services should you want to annex, but that doesn't mean that we're going to make you annex,
Yes,
as we have lots of subdivisions that haven't annexed,
right.
for whatever reason. Okay, thanks.
and just to clarify, because I brought the cursor over to the Schildauer property at 41st and Sertoma that everybody's familiar with. I mean, and they've been able to be serviced for years, and we're not talking to them. At the same time, if you go to the east side, for people that are familiar with east, Pine Lake, Split Rock, Pine Lake Hills, they're all shown as yellow or light taupe, whatever. And again, they're all able to be serviced whenever they'd like to, but again, their timeframes don't change, and we're not highlighting any more annexation. It's just, these maps just update the tier timeframes.
All right, further questions? Thank you very much, very informative. It is one of the topics that we deal with all the time. We'd like to stay informed on that. At this time, I'll ask for public input. Seeing none, I'd like to remind the council that tonight we go to Lincoln County for a joint meeting, and tomorrow morning is the Breakfast Club, 7:30 at Hy-Vee. This meeting's adjourned.